Christmas Eve. The fire was crackling. Laughter circled the table like a garland on a tree. Then Grandpa raised his glass, looked at me, and asked with a proud smile, "Dorian, do you like your new house?" I froze. I glanced at my father, at Susan, at the walls lined with photos I wasn't in. "It's a beautiful house," I said, "but it's not mine." Just like that, the warmth in the room collapsed. No one moved, no one spoke. And in that moment, I knew something wasn't right. My name is Dorian Marston. Before I take you deeper into this story, tell us, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Because what happened next, you won't believe just how far it went. And this is the story of how my family erased me from a house that was meant to be mine, from a future that was stolen before I even knew it existed. I watched Grandpa's smile falter. His gaze flicked between me and my father, waiting for anyone to say it was just a misunderstanding. No one did. Dad coughed lightly, pretending to adjust his napkin. Susan looked down at her wine glass like it had something important to say. Ben, my half-brother, just kept chewing as if none of this had anything to do with him. Of course it didn't. It never did. Grandpa slowly set his glass down. The tension in his shoulders rose like a tide. He turned to Gregory, my father, with a sharpness I hadn't seen in years. "I thought this house was for Dorian." "It is," Susan said quickly, voice overly sweet. "It's for the family." I almost laughed. Almost. But I knew better. Laughing would have made me look unstable, and that's what they were always ready to believe, that I was dramatic, ungrateful, cold. "It's fine," I said. My voice came out even, controlled. "I was just invited for dinner." The silence that followed wasn't silence. It was loaded like a chambered bullet, the kind of quiet that begged someone to pull the trigger. Grandpa's eyes locked on me again. "Why don't we take a little walk, son?" Not a question. I nodded and stood. The chair scraped the hardwood floor like a warning. As I followed him into the hallway, I saw Ben finally glance up briefly. He looked at me like I was the problem, like I'd made a scene. But I hadn't. I never did. That was the point. The front door closed behind us with a soft click. Snow was falling lightly outside, the kind that muffles sound and sharpens memory. Grandpa didn't speak right away. We walked down the steps past the two perfect wreaths Susan had chosen and stopped near the curb. "Tell me the truth," he said. "Is this your house or not?" I looked at him, at the lines in his face carved by decades of war and work and disappointment. And I told him, "No, it's not. I don't live here. I wasn't told it was being bought. I wasn't asked. I was invited. After it was done." He stared at me, blinking slowly. "I wired money to your father, over $400,000, 2 years ago, for a down payment on a property in your name Dorian." "I know," I said. "I found the email, last week." His jaw tightened. "And the deed belongs to him. And Susan." Grandpa's eyes didn't blink. "Did you sign anything?" "No. Nothing. I didn't even know it existed until the Christmas card arrived calling it our family's dream home." That's when I knew something was off. The wind picked up. I could feel the betrayal settling into his bones the same way it had settled into mine. But this was different. He'd believed he was giving me a foundation. They had turned it into leverage. "I'll deal with this," he muttered. "Gregory thinks he's clever. He thinks I'm disposable," I corrected quietly. Grandpa turned to me, then really looked. "You were never that. Your mother, God rest her soul, would have never let this happen." "I know." We stood there in this cold, the night, swallowing our breath. The warmth from the house behind us, laughter, clinking glasses, and Susan's curated playlist felt like they belonged to someone else. It always had. "Come back to Chicago with me," Grandpa said. I hesitated. "I have a room. Hell, I have 5. One of them is yours if you want it." I looked at him. The only man who'd ever called me son without conditions. The one who'd taught me to tie a tie, to drive stick, to write a thank you note even when you felt nothing. He wasn't offering pity. He was offering ground. And I needed ground. "I'll pack my things." He nodded once. Final. We didn't go back inside. We didn't owe them an explanation. The next morning I left without fanfare. No goodbye from Susan. Gregory was still in bed. Ben texted me later. You didn't have to make it weird, man. I didn't reply. Chicago greeted me with the kind of chill that clears your lungs. Grandpa didn't talk much on the drive. Neither did I. But the silence between us wasn't heavy. It was mutual understanding. The house was large but not extravagant. Brick, clean lines, faint smell of old books and fresh coffee. He showed me the guest room, but it wasn't a guest room. It had photos of me from years ago, frames I didn't know existed. He'd kept everything. My high school newspaper column, the program from my debate state finals, even a faded sketch I drew when I was 10, bad proportions, sloppy shading. It was framed. "This is your home," he said. It always was. And for the first time in years, I believed someone. I sat with that will in my hands for a long time, not reading it again, just holding it like it was proof I hadn't imagined everything, like it could tether me to something real, something fair. But fairness was a luxury in my family. "Gregory's going to say it was a misunderstanding," I finally said. "He'll twist it. Say I misunderstood your intentions." Grandpa nodded slowly. "That's why I asked Atwood to dig, see if Gregory ever filed a new version. So far, nothing. No amended will, no new filing." He looked at me, and for a moment the weight of his years pressed through the quiet. "I'm ashamed, Dorian. I handed him power I should have given you. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Because part of me, some bitter, broken part, had been waiting my whole life for someone in that family to just say those words, 'I failed you.'" That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the library room, surrounded by things Grandpa had kept, things my father had thrown away or left to rot. There was a photo of me at age 6 riding Grandpa's shoulders at the county fair. I looked so happy, so unaware. I pulled out my laptop. Property records, deed history, mortgage trail. It wasn't just the house Gregory had taken. It was the whole illusion. The down payment Grandpa wired had gone through a shell LLC registered under Susan's name. The mortgage was refinanced 6 months later under Gregory's sole control. My name had never appeared. Not once. He'd planned it from the start. Worse, the Christmas card hadn't just said our family's dream home. It had said, "Thanks to your generous legacy, we built this future together." A performative lie mailed to dozens of relatives who didn't know better. They'd used Grandpa's name as a marketing slogan for their social image. And me, an afterthought, a shadow. The next morning I printed everything, the will, the sticky note, the wire transfer record, and the LLC filings. I slid it all into a clean folder. Grandpa watched me from across the breakfast table. "I want to do this right," I told him. He just nodded. "You always did." Later that week I requested a meeting with Gregory in public on neutral ground, a restaurant downtown. He agreed. Susan didn't come. Ben didn't respond. He walked in late as usual, wearing that smug coat he bought when the market was good. The one he wore to look like a provider, not a predator. "Dorian," he said, nodding like we were about to play chess. "Gregory," I said back. "No, Dad. Not anymore." I let him order his overpriced steak, let him sip wine, let him feel in control. Then I slid the folder across the table. He blinked at it, smiled thinly. "What's this?" "You know what it is." He opened it, flipped through 2 pages. The smile dropped, replaced by something harder to name, recognition mixed with insult. "You dug up the old will," he said. "You buried it." He set the folder down, folded his hands, and looked at me the way a man looks at a leaky pipe, annoyed, not apologetic. "I didn't file that version because it was premature. Your grandfather was grieving. He asked me to hold it. Then we talked again later, and he agreed it made more sense to hold the property jointly. You talked. I wasn't in the room." "You weren't ready," he said, shrugging. "Let's be honest, Dorian. You've never been great with responsibility." There it was. I took a breath. Let the silence do what silence does best, magnify the lie. Then I leaned forward. "Don't confuse quiet with weakness, Gregory. I wasn't supposed to be ready. I was supposed to be obedient. And now I'm neither." He said nothing. "I don't want the house," I added. "Not anymore." His eyebrows lifted in surprise. "I want the truth. On record. I want Grandpa's name cleared. I want every family member who got that card to know exactly what you did." And if I say no, I smiled. For the first time in years, I meant it. Then you'll hear from Atwood and Sinclair. They're filing the original will with sworn testimony, and if I have to take the stand, I will." He stood, took the folder, didn't say goodbye. And as he walked out of that restaurant, I knew he was scared. Not because he could lose the house, because he couldn't control the narrative anymore. 3 days after the will arrived, Grandpa made the call. "Gregory," he said, tone flat, "we need to talk. All of us. In person." Gregory must have assumed it was about something else, an apology maybe, or one of Grandpa's infamous family realignments. He agreed without resistance, said, "Of course, Dad." Sunday lunch. It was set, but Grandpa wasn't going there to eat, and neither was I. We pulled into the driveway just before noon. Snow had begun to melt around the edges, exposing muddy grass and brittle hedges Susan hadn't bothered to trim. The door opened before we rang. Gregory stood there in a maroon sweater, trying too hard to look relaxed. "Dad, Dorian, come in." Susan hovered behind him, arms folded in a way that pretended to be casual but screamed defense. We stepped into the house I once thought would be mine. The smell was different this time. Less festive, more staged. Like cinnamon-scented candles trying too hard to cover something rotten. We didn't sit in the dining room. Grandpa asked for the office. Gregory flinched a little at that, but nodded. "Sure, let's talk." The office was Susan's domain now. Pale walls, glass desk, no trace of the old bookshelf Grandpa built with his own hands. No family photos either, unless you counted the one of Ben grinning beside a soccer trophy placed deliberately beside a stack of unopened mail. We all sat. Grandpa reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the copy of the old will. "I want you to explain this," he said, sliding it across the desk. Gregory didn't even touch it. He just glanced at it, then looked at Susan, then back at Grandpa. "That's an old draft," he said slowly. "A draft that left the house to Dorian. We talked about updating it together, remember?" Gregory said. "But then Mom passed and everything went sideways. You said we'd revisit it." "I said we'd finalize it," Grandpa snapped. "You said you'd file it." There was a pause. Not a long one, but just long enough. Susan cleared her throat. "That version wasn't legally binding, was it?" "No," Grandpa said. "Because Gregory never filed it." Silence. Gregory shifted. "Look, Dad, I didn't mean to—" "You didn't mean to what?" Grandpa cut in. "Didn't mean to let me believe Dorian had a home. Didn't mean to take the money I wired with a specific purpose and use it for yourself." Susan stepped in again. "The money went into a joint account." Grandpa turned to her. "I wasn't talking to you." Susan's lips tightened, but she said nothing else. Gregory leaned forward, suddenly desperate. "I thought Dorian didn't want it." I blinked. "What?" "You never said you wanted the house," he insisted, eyes darting. "You were always so distant. You left town. You didn't come to the planning meetings. We assumed you assumed wrong," I said, my voice like ice. Grandpa didn't interrupt. He let the words hang. Gregory tried again. "Dorian, you've always been complicated, sensitive. You pulled away. I thought giving the house to the family Susan Ben was practical. Stable." "Stable," I repeated. "You mean controllable." He looked down. "You thought I wouldn't ask questions." I continued. "That I'd be grateful just to be invited to dinner." Still no response. Gregory Grandpa said, quieter now, but no less firm. "Did you lie to me about the deed?" Gregory's voice cracked. "I didn't lie. I just didn't correct you." Grandpa stood up. "That's all I needed to know." He looked at me. "We're done here." We didn't wait for lunch. Back in the car, Grandpa sat in silence, jaw clenched. It wasn't anger. It was heartbreak, coated in resignation. He broke the silence halfway back to Chicago. He always wanted to be the center of the story, he muttered, even when he didn't earn it. "I don't want the house if it means war," I said quietly. "It's not about the house anymore," he replied. "It's about dignity and correction." I nodded. But something inside me had already changed. The house wasn't just property, now it was proof of what I'd been denied, of what I had to reclaim. That night I opened my laptop. I dug up every paper trail I could find, bank transfers, old emails, and calendar invites Grandpa had sent for property viewings which I'd never received. Then I found something else, a photo. It was 2 years ago. Grandpa was standing in front of an empty lot, smiling, holding a little sign that said, "Future Home." He'd CC'd me on that email. I never saw it, because it had gone to an old address I hadn't used since college. Gregory knew that. He was managing Grandpa's digital accounts at the time to make things easier. He must have changed the settings. He made me disappear by rerouting the narrative. The next morning I made an appointment with a lawyer. Her name was Maureen Keller, sharp eyes, sharper tongue, and the kind of handshake that let you know she was always one step ahead. After reviewing the documents, she looked up. "There's a case here," she said. "But the will was never filed," I said. She tapped the desk. "Doesn't matter. Intent is everything. If we can prove your grandfather's financial decisions match the terms of this will and that Gregory intentionally misled him, we've got grounds for fraud, constructive trust, maybe even elder financial abuse. Will that get the house back?" She smiled. "It'll do more than that." The next few weeks were quiet on the surface, but full of motion underneath. Grandpa transferred full financial power of attorney to me. Maureen's firm began pulling every record. Gregory received a polite but firm letter requesting that the deed be frozen pending legal review. That was the first time he called me. "Dorian," he said, voice tight. "Why are you doing this?" "Why did you do it?" I asked back. He didn't answer, just sighed. "You know this will tear the family apart." "There was no family left to tear," I said, "not after what you did." He hung up. Susan sent me a long email 2 days later. It wasn't apologetic, it was performative. She framed the whole thing as a misunderstanding, accused me of dragging Grandpa through unnecessary stress, and ended it with, "We just want peace, Dorian, especially for Ben's sake." I didn't respond, because Ben never cared. He hadn't called, he hadn't texted again. Not even when the notice about the deed came through and Gregory had to explain to him why things suddenly felt shaky. I wasn't surprised. He'd grown up being told I was complicated, difficult, the one who always overreacted. That's the narrative they sold him. One night as I was boxing up old things at Grandpa's house, I found a letter, my mother's handwriting. It was dated the year before she passed. Inside she wrote, "If anything ever happens to me, please don't let Gregory make all the decisions for Dorian. He's not unkind, but he doesn't understand him. He doesn't try. Dorian will need an anchor. He'll need someone who sees him." I sat there for a long time after reading that. Then I folded the letter and placed it in the same envelope as the old will. It would come in handy. The first court hearing was scheduled for early spring. Maureen said it was likely to settle before then, but she prepared me for the long haul. "People like your father don't give things up until they're forced to." She was right. Because 2 weeks later, Gregory filed a motion claiming Grandpa was not of sound mind when he originally drafted the will. That was his play, to call his father senile to keep a house. Maureen smiled when she read the filing. "Good. He just handed us his weakness, which is character," she said, "or lack of it." I didn't tell Grandpa about the motion right away. He'd been sleeping more, eating less. But one night I showed him the document, let him read it in full. He set the papers down and whispered, "He did that?" I nodded. He didn't look angry, just tired. Then he stood up, walked to his desk, and pulled out a leather-bound planner. "This," he said, handing it to me, "is every appointment I had with the realtors, the bank, the inspector. Every signature, every check I wrote was dated, initialed." I opened the book. It was all there. Proof that he was sharp, methodical, committed. Proof that he was in every sense of sound mind. That night I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders and thought about justice. Not revenge, not even victory, just a correction. Because when someone spends years slowly erasing you what you want, most isn't applause or punishment. It's to exist again, to be seen, documented, acknowledged. To walk into a house and know you belong, not because someone handed it to you out of pity, but because it was yours from the beginning. It wasn't a courtroom yet, just a high-rise conference room on the 18th floor of a glass-paneled building in downtown Chicago. But to me it felt heavier than any courtroom I'd ever imagined. The walls were cold, neutral gray. A pitcher of water sat untouched on the long mahogany table. At the head, Maureen, calm, sharp, her notes arranged with surgical precision. To my left, Grandpa, pale but composed. His cane was resting against the chair. He hadn't said much during the ride here, but his grip on my arm when we entered said enough. Across from us sat Gregory, flanked by his lawyer, a slick man named Nathan Vaughn, who introduced himself with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Susan wasn't present. Her signature on the deed wasn't in question. Yet. Maureen began. This is a formal deposition regarding Marston vs. Marston case file 2413 CIV concerning allegations of fraud, elder financial abuse, and misrepresentation of property ownership. All parties present are being recorded. Gregory nodded once stiff. Maureen continued. Mr. Gregory Marston, did you receive a bank transfer from your father, George Marston, on August 15, 2021 in the amount of $425,000? Gregory shifted. Yes. What was the stated purpose of that transfer? He paused. To assist with a home purchase. For whom? For the family. Maureen didn't blink. Be specific, please. Gregory cleared his throat. For my son. For Dorian. Was the home ever registered in Dorian Marston's name? No. Was he ever informed that funds had been transferred on his behalf? Silence. I don't recall. Maureen smiled faintly. Would you like me to show you the email your father sent to you and Dorian on August 20th, 2021, outlining his expectations for the property and asking for updates? Gregory's lawyer interrupted. We object to phrasing. The witness has stated he does not recall. Maureen handed over the printout anyway. Then let us refresh his memory. Gregory took the page reluctantly. His eyes scanned the contents. I watched his face tense just slightly at the sight of my name in the CC line. He slid the paper back. I must have missed that. Or redirected it, Maureen asked. I don't know what you're implying. Oh, I think you do. The questioning continued. Maureen brought out statements, bank deposits, text logs, and old calendar invites. Each one paints a quiet but damning picture. Gregory hadn't just forgotten to inform me. He had actively taken steps to exclude me. Changing email settings, filtering mail, canceling calendar invites, moving money through shared accounts with Susan. He never yelled, never confessed. But by the time the deposition reached its midpoint, the weight of the paper evidence was undeniable. Even Vaughn looked less confident. Then came the real turning point. Mr. Marston, Maureen said, sliding forward a printed document. Are you familiar with this version of your father's will? He barely glanced at it. It was never filed, but it was written, signed, dated. Would you like to explain this sticky note written in your handwriting that says, "We'll file this together once we add Susan and Ben"? Gregory stiffened. That note wasn't official, but it demonstrates intent, Maureen said, and intent matters. Gregory stayed silent. She waited a beat, then turned to Grandpa. Mr. George Marston, do you recall asking your son to file this version of the will on your behalf? Grandpa leaned forward slowly. Yes. He said he would handle it. I believed him. Maureen nodded. Did you ever revoke that instruction? No. Did you ever give him permission to amend it without your knowledge? No. Her voice sharpened. Did he ever disclose to you that the property would be registered under his name and Susan's instead of Dorian's? Grandpa's eyes narrowed. Never. That word dropped like a hammer. The deposition was supposed to last an hour. It went for nearly 3. By the end, Gregory was sweating through his collar. Vaughn's objections had thinned. Every defensive tactic had been softened by documentation. But Maureen wasn't finished. We have one more item, she said, reaching into her case. A letter. My mother's letter. I'd like this to be entered as supplemental context. It's not legal instruction, but it reflects the family dynamic, particularly regarding Mr. Gregory Marston's long-term treatment of his son. Vaughn raised an eyebrow. A letter from the deceased, Maureen slid it across. A mother's words. Written a year before she died. Addressed to the man who now calls her son too complicated to inherit anything. Gregory paled. He didn't read the letter. He couldn't. After we left, Grandpa leaned heavily on his cane. I never thought I'd see the day my son was questioned like that. I offered my arm. I'm sorry it had to be this way. No, he said, jaw firm. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. We got into the car. The city moved around us in a soft blur. I watched the traffic lights flash on buildings that didn't care about bloodlines or betrayals. Only truth. And maybe, just maybe, recovery. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Gregory's voice from the deposition. Not the words, but the tone, the shift from performance to panic. A man so used to control suddenly faced with consequences. I thought of all the Thanksgivings where I was given the smallest room. The birthdays are forgotten. the graduation where no one came. And I wondered, had this always been the plan? Was I simply invisible, or had I been erased on purpose? The next morning, a new email arrived from Maureen. Subject: formal offer. I clicked it open. It was from Vaughn. They were trying to settle. Gregory, through counsel, proposed the following: transfer of partial ownership of the house co-shared with Susan, an undisclosed financial sum as family reparations, a non-disparagement clause, meaning I'd have to remain silent. I stared at the screen. They wanted me quiet. They wanted me paid off. They wanted the illusion of unity restored even if everything beneath it had rotted. I forwarded the email to Grandpa. His reply was instant. We do not negotiate with cowards. We correct the record. Finish this. And I knew what he meant. Not just for me, but for every time someone quietly accepts being erased in the name of keeping the peace. The courthouse wasn't grand. No marble pillars, no high ceilings echoing justice. Just beige walls humming fluorescence and worn-out carpet that had seen too many ruined families pass through. But for me, it was sacred ground. I sat beside Maureen at the plaintiff's table, my hands still, my jaw tight. Grandpa sat directly behind us. He wore his old wool coat, the same one he used to take me to the museum when I was a kid. A quiet reminder you carry history into battle. Gregory was across the aisle, his tie too neat, his hair dyed just slightly too dark. Susan wasn't next to him. Not today. That silence I took as its kind of confession. The judge, an older black woman named Justice Ellen Monroe, called us to order. Opening statements, she said, nodding. Maureen stood calm as winter. Your Honor, this is not simply a property dispute. This is a story of betrayal by omission, of legal manipulation dressed up as family dynamics. Mr. Dorian Marston was promised a home by his grandfather both in spirit and in fact. That promise was deliberately intercepted by his father, Mr. Gregory Marston, who used proximity and grief to rewrite that future for himself. Today we are here to set that record straight. Not out of vengeance, but clarity. Vaughn followed with his usual sheen. This case is a tragic misunderstanding between relatives. We believe that while Mr. Marston, our client, did accept financial assistance from his father, there was never a legal commitment to transfer the property to the plaintiff. This is a matter of memory, not malice. I almost laughed at that. Memory, not malice. Tell that to the will that never got filed, or the email that vanished, or the photos were erased from the hallway walls. The first two witnesses were procedural, a paralegal from Atwood and Sinclair confirming dates and email trails, then the bank officer who processed the wire transfer. But it was the third witness, Grandpa, who carried the room. He walked slowly, each step a memory. Once sworn in, he sat with quiet fire. Maureen's voice softened. Mr. Marston, can you tell us in your own words why you transferred the money to your son? He didn't hesitate. Because Dorian deserved a home. I'd promised his mother before she passed that we'd take care of him, that he'd have something of his own when he was ready. I trusted Gregory to make it happen. Did you specify the purpose of the funds? I did. In writing. Did you expect Dorian's name to be on the title? Yes. Was it no? She let the pause hang like a dropped anchor. Did you ever give your son permission to amend your will? No. Did you ever ask him to delay the filing? Never. And to your knowledge, was this will, the one naming Dorian as sole inheritor, ever filed? He shook his head. No. It was shelved. Without my consent. Vaughn tried to cross-examine, but it backfired. Mr. Marston, would you say your memory has declined in recent years? Grandpa smiled coldly. My bones may forget, sir. My blood does not. The judge didn't even hide her smirk. Then came the surprise. Maureen stood. Your Honor, with permission, we'd like to call an additional witness, one that was disclosed late due to recent contact. The doors opened. Ben, my half-brother, dressed in a wrinkled hoodie and jeans, head down. But he walked to the stand like someone carrying a secret too long. Gregory stiffened. You could see his jaw lock. Once sworn in, Maureen asked Ben, do you recall the evening your family moved into the Christmas Creek property? He nodded. Yeah. There were boxes everywhere. Dad was tense. Did you overhear any conversations that day? Ben hesitated. He told Susan not to tell Dorian anything yet, that he'd find out eventually, but after we're settled. He said Grandpa wouldn't remember details anyway. A whisper moved through the room. Did he ever mention the will? Ben looked down. He said if it wasn't filed, it didn't count, and that once Grandpa moved to a home or passed, he'd make sure things were locked down. Gregory jumped up. This is ridiculous. He's a teenager. He doesn't know what he heard. The judge pounded her gavel. Mr. Marston, sit down. He did, slowly, but his eyes burned toward his son. Ben swallowed. I'm sorry, Dad, but it wasn't right. And just like that, the air changed. You could feel the shift, like a tide finally giving way to truth. After recess, Maureen presented the final documents, the old will, the email chains, and the sticky note in Gregory's handwriting. She ended with a simple statement: no one should have to fight this hard for something they were already promised. Gregory's defense collapsed the next day. Susan declined to testify. Through her lawyer, she stated she wanted to remove herself from all legal proceedings. Vaughn tried to stall, motioning for settlement, arbitration, or even mediation. The judge denied it all. She called for closing statements. Maureen stood. Your Honor, what matters most here is that intent, clear documented intent, was violated. This is not about punishing a man for being greedy. It's about protecting the dignity of a legacy meant for someone who was systematically excluded. Vaughn said little. The verdict will be announced in 1 week. That night, Grandpa and I sat on his back porch, whiskey in hand, watching snow fall over his quiet Chicago street. You okay? He asked. I think so. He nodded. He never wanted to raise you. You know that, right? Your mom saw it. She made me promise just in case. I just thought he'd change. I know. And I waited too long to fix it. I turned to him. You're fixing it now. He looked at me, then not with regret, but resolve. Whatever happens next, this part, you won. And I believed him. The courthouse smelled the same: old paper, bad coffee, and fear. But this time the fear wasn't mine. I sat on the left side of the courtroom. Maureen was next to me, calm, confident, her legal pad already open. Across the aisle, Gregory sat alone. No Susan, no Ben. Even his lawyer Vaughn looked more like a handler than an ally. He wasn't wearing his usual custom-tailored suit. Instead, it looked like something bought last minute, a size too tight collar, slightly wrinkled. The man who once boasted over estate strategy now wouldn't meet my eyes. The bailiff called the session to order. All rise. Judge Monroe entered. She didn't smile. She rarely did. Her face, as always, was unreadable, like a granite statue sculpted to intimidate. This is the ruling for Marston vs. Marston, she began, regarding legal ownership of the Christmas Creek property and allegations of intentional suppression of testamentary documents. Her voice echoed off the cheap acoustic panels. Gregory shifted. I didn't blink. Judge Monroe continued. After reviewing the plaintiff's documentation, including financial transfers made by Mr. Ernest Marston in 2018, the intended designation of property in a preliminary will draft, and testimonial statements from both Ernest Marston and corroborating witnesses, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Dorian Marston. The sentence didn't register at first. It was too simple. Then Maureen touched my wrist lightly. Just once. Confirmation. Judge Monroe kept speaking. Therefore, legal ownership of the Christmas Creek property will be transferred to Mr. Marston within 30 calendar days. Any mortgage lien or encumbrance placed upon the property after the 2018 financial transfer will be deemed void unless explicitly agreed upon by the plaintiff. Gregory leaned forward slightly as if to say something but said nothing, his hands clenched on the bench. White knuckles. Judge Monroe looked directly at him now. Furthermore, the court advises the district attorney's office to consider initiating a formal investigation into possible financial misconduct, including embezzlement, perjury, and obstruction of estate management. And just like that, the man who tried to erase me turned to ash. Outside the courthouse, flashes went off. Reporters, microphones, questions I didn't answer. I kept walking. Grandpa was waiting near the parking lot. He wasn't wearing a tie, just his old coat and that soft smile I hadn't seen in months. He didn't say anything, just put his hand on my shoulder and looked me in the eye. You did good, kid, he said after a moment. Your mother would have been proud. I nodded. So would you. He gave a short, tired laugh. Hell yes, I am. The weight didn't disappear, but it shifted. It was no longer on me. The next morning, I woke to an email. Subject: formal apology and relinquishment. Dorian, I acknowledge the court's ruling and will comply with the transfer of the property. I understand the DA may reach out to me and will cooperate. For what it's worth, I never meant to hurt you. I did what I thought I had to do. Gregory. I read it once, closed my laptop. Some apologies are just seatbelts offered after the crash. 2 months later, I unlocked the door to the Christmas Creek house. My house. The key turned differently now. Lighter, smoother. I stepped inside. It still smelled the same wood polish, old pine, and lemon oil. But the air carried something else too, an absence. No voices, no pretending, just silence. And mine to shape. The walls were still lined with framed photos. Susan had arranged them like a museum exhibit, curated memories, perfect lighting, smiles, polished for company. I wasn't in a single one, not even the background. I took them down, one by one. Some shattered, most didn't. I didn't replace them with revenge. I replaced them with truth. A photo of Mom and me sitting on the floor, coloring trees with crayons. Grandpa and I soaked in rain, grinning under a graduation banner. A photo of just me taken the day I got my first apartment. Tired eyes, real. And in the hallway, an empty frame, just glass. Below it, a note, space reserved for what's real. Upstairs, I opened the closet in my old room. Most of my childhood things were gone, donated, boxed, erased. But in the corner, buried behind Susan's stack of yoga mats and scented candles, was a single flat envelope. No stamp, no name, just my initials. I opened it slowly. Inside a letter. My mother's handwriting. Dorian. If you're reading this, then something didn't go as planned. I'm sorry. I tried to make it all simple. I wanted this house to be your anchor. Not because it's big or beautiful, but because I believed you'd make it warm again. If someone tried to take it from you, I hope you fought for it. Not for the bricks and beams, but for the truth. Forgiveness is noble, but so is protection. If you had to choose one, I trust you made the right call. Love you always. Mom. I read it twice, then once more. Then I folded it, placed it back in the envelope, and left it on the windowsill where we used to sit and draw trees. Not for closure, for continuity. I didn't throw a party, I didn't post online, but I did invite Grandpa for tea. We sat by the fireplace, the same spot where the lie had unraveled months ago. He noticed the walls. You changed the photos. I nodded. He smiled. Good. The house looks like it's breathing again. We sipped our tea in silence. Then he said, You gonna keep it? I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe for a while. Then maybe I'll sell. He nodded. No judgment. Because he understood what few people ever do. Sometimes the value of a thing lies not in owning it, but in reclaiming it first. Now when I walk through the hallway, I don't flinch at the photos. Now when I stand on the porch, I don't hear their laughter. And when I sleep, I dream of nothing, which for once is peace. If you're still with me, thank you. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. It arrives like snow, slowly, surely covering everything false. But it leaves one thing visible. The path you took to get here. It started with a voicemail. Not a call, not a knock, just a message I didn't expect and almost didn't listen to. Dorian, it's Susan. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I left something behind at the house. In the attic. It's in a blue tin marked Christmas lights. If you find it, just please don't throw it away before I come by. I'll only be 5 minutes. Click. No apology. No explanation. Just a request. I waited 2 days before responding. Not because I needed time to think, but because silence was no longer something I feared, it was something I could control. Eventually I replied, Tomorrow. Noon. Don't be late. She wasn't. She arrived in a silver SUV that still bore the faint scent of new leather and wealth. But she looked older now. Smaller somehow. The kind of tired that makeup can't cover. I opened the door but didn't step aside. You said 5 minutes. She gave a quick nod, clutching her designer handbag like it was armor. Yes. Thank you. She walked in without waiting for permission. The house hadn't changed much since the court ruling, but it felt different. No curated smiles, no music playing in the background, no pretense, just breathe. And truth. She stopped near the stairs, her hand brushing the banister as if expecting it to remember her. "I'll go straight up," she said. I followed. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I needed to see what she'd buried. The attic door stuck slightly the way it always had. She pulled it open, revealing the narrow staircase and the dust that coated everything. At the top, she walked straight to the far corner. No hesitation. She moved a few boxes, my old books, some of Mom's holiday decorations, and pulled out a large blue tin labeled Xmas Lights. She didn't open it. She just held it both hands tight around the edges. "Is that it?" I asked. She nodded, but her lips trembled slightly. Then, "Do you mind if I sit for a second?" We were surrounded by insulation and rafters, but I gestured to an old wooden stool. She took it slowly. "I suppose you want to know what's in here," she said. I didn't answer, because silence wasn't consent, but it was pressure, and she cracked under it. She opened the tin. Inside were no lights. There were letters, stacks of them, rubber-banded, yellowed from age. She handed me one. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My mother's. "Susan," she said quietly, "wrote to your mother. A lot. When they were younger. But especially after you were born." I stared at her. She kept everything Susan said, even the ones she never responded to. My throat tightened. I pulled the first letter out. "Dear Susan, I know we've never seen eye to eye, and maybe we never will. But Dorian is here now, and whatever you think of me, I hope one day you'll think of him differently. He didn't ask for this fractured family, but maybe he's what heals it. Maybe he's the one who sees past all the things we've both ruined." I folded it. Susan didn't meet my eyes. "She gave me this tin before she passed," she said, voice thin. "Told me to give it to you when the time was right. Why didn't you?" I asked, even though I already knew. She bit her lip. "Because the time was never right. And then Gregory and I had plans. And you were always so distant," I laughed, bitter and low. "Distant. You built a house without me, put my brother's name on the deed, called it a family home." Her voice rose suddenly. "Because he made things easier. He didn't question. He didn't make us feel guilty." There it was. The truth no one ever said aloud. I was inconvenient, not rebellious, not angry, just a reminder of a woman they couldn't control, of a legacy they couldn't rewrite. "You wanted my silence," I said. "And when I didn't give it, you gave my place to someone else." Susan looked down at the letters, her shoulders shaking. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought if we moved on, it would be better." "You didn't move on," I said. "You covered up. There's a difference." We sat in the attic for a long moment. The insulation rustled in the breeze from the tiny vent. Outside, somewhere far below, a car drove past. She finally stood. "I'm sorry," she said. And this time it almost sounded like she meant it. "But I didn't say I forgive you, because forgiveness isn't a performance. It's a process." I stood too still, holding the tin. "You can have 5 of these letters. The rest stay here." Her eyes widened, but she didn't argue. Maybe she knew she'd already kept them from me long enough. We walked down in silence. At the front door, she turned. "Is there anything you need from me?" I thought about it, then said, "No. But if you ever speak to Ben again, tell him I don't hate him. He just made his choice. And so did I." She nodded, then left. Later that night, I sat in the kitchen, letters spread before me like maps of a past no one thought I'd ever see. Some were angry, some gentle, some scared. But all of them were real. And in each one, I saw pieces of myself I hadn't known had been recorded. In her grief, my mother had written herself raw. And somehow, Susan, flawed, fragile, complicit, had been the keeper of it all. Maybe that's what haunted me most. She wasn't the villain I wanted her to be. Just a woman too weak to carry what she was given and too proud to ask for help. But I wasn't here to redeem her. I was here to remember my mother, to take back the things silence had tried to erase. The attic is empty now, except for one box. It holds the letters, and the tin, and a new label written in black marker, not lights, still shines. The first snow of March came early that year. It blanketed Chicago in a soft hush, like the city itself wanted to be quiet for once. I woke to the sound of it, that thick stillness you can only hear when the world decides not to interrupt you. I knew where I had to go. There was a cemetery on the west side, not famous. Not ornate, just rows of simple markers and quiet trees. Mom had chosen it herself, said she liked that it didn't try too hard to be anything it wasn't. The drive took 30 minutes. I didn't turn on the radio. When I arrived, the gate was slightly ajar. The groundskeeper nodded as I passed but didn't say a word. I found her plot the way you find an old photograph in a forgotten drawer, unexpected and familiar all at once. Evelyn Marston, 1958 to 2007. She listened more than she spoke. That was the line I'd chosen when I was 19. I barely remember picking it. I just remember thinking she would have liked something simple, something honest. I stood there for a long time before I spoke. "Hi, Mom." The wind stirred a bit, brushing snow from the top of the stone. "I read your letters, the ones you wrote to Susan. I didn't even know they existed, but you kept writing them anyway. That says something." I took a breath. "I thought about reading them to you, but I think you already know what they say." I knelt then, resting one gloved hand on the earth. "I don't know what you'd think of me right now. If you'd be proud, if you'd be hurt, if you'd ask why I waited this long to fight for something I was supposed to have all along." The air was still, not cold, not warm, just suspended. "But I think I know what you'd ask me if you were here." You asked it in the letters again and again, even without the words, "Did you choose protection or forgiveness?" I exhaled, watching my breath hang like smoke. I chose protection, for a long time. I thought if I just stayed quiet, stayed composed, didn't stir the waters, no one could accuse me of being difficult. No one could hurt me if I didn't expect anything. I swallowed hard, but I think I'm ready to choose something else now. There was no answer, of course, no voice from the clouds, no sudden sunbeam, but there was peace, a kind I hadn't felt in years. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a photograph. It was us, Mom and me, on a bench near Lake Michigan just before my senior year. Her scarf was crooked. My hair was too long. We were both laughing. I placed it against the headstone and anchored it with a stone. "I didn't forget you," I said, "even when they tried to, even when they made a family that didn't include me. I stood, and I forgive you for the parts of me you didn't get to finish." I paused, then added, "And I forgive myself too." The wind blew harder, then almost sharp, almost approving. That evening, back at Grandpa's house, I made a fire. He came into the living room, newspaper tucked under his arm. "You were out long today. I visited Mom." He sat down without asking anything else. Then quietly, "You look different." "How so?" "Like you finally said something you needed to." I nodded. I did. Later that night, I opened the last letter in the tin, one Susan hadn't mentioned. The envelope was worn unopened, addressed simply to Dorian. Someday. Inside, a single page. "If you're reading this, then it means you found what I couldn't say in person. I don't know how the story ends, sweetheart. But I do know this. You don't have to earn your place in a family that loves you. And you don't have to prove your worth by staying quiet. You are not a burden. You are not too much. You are mine, and you are already enough. Mom." I didn't cry. Not then. But something unclenched, something I didn't even realize I'd been holding for decades. That night, I slept without dreaming. And in the morning, I made coffee. Not for anyone else. Just for me. It was a Thursday. The kind of gray-skied afternoon where time doesn't seem to move. I was working on Grandpa's porch, fixing a loose railing he'd put off since fall, when I heard the car. A silver Acura. Rental. I knew the plate type. Ben. He stepped out slower than I expected. Not sheepish, but not arrogant either. Just hesitant. Like someone unsure whether the ground would hold. He didn't wave. I didn't move. "Hey," he said finally. I rested the drill on the step. "You drove 12 hours for hay." Ben's mouth twitched. Not a smile. Not quite. "I figured you wouldn't pick up if I called." He was right. I stood and wiped my hands on a towel. "So why are you here?" He shoved his hands into his jacket pockets. "I guess I didn't want us to end like that." "Us," I echoed. He looked away, then back at me. I should have said something. That night, I saw the look on your face when Grandpa asked about the house. I knew it wasn't right. And I was a coward. There it was. 3 words that weighed more than most apologies I'd heard all year. I sat back down on the porch step. "Did Dad send you?" "No," Ben said quickly. "He doesn't know I'm here." That surprised me more than I cared to show. "He's not talking to me either," Ben added after a beat. "He says I embarrassed the family when I didn't show up for Susan's birthday brunch." I laughed cold. The horror. Ben cracked a half smile. "I guess I finally saw what you'd been seeing for years." I looked at him. For the first time, really. Not as the golden child, not as the silent observer, but as someone who might have been stuck to just differently. "You were never cruel," I said, "just convenient." He nodded slowly. "That's fair." There was a long pause between us, filled with the sound of snow dripping off the roof. Then he pulled something from his jacket. A photo. Us. Me and I. At the lake house, summer 2005. He's grinning, teeth missing. I'm holding a fishing pole. Grandpa's arm is around both our shoulders. "I found it in a drawer at Dad's," he said. "Thought maybe you'd want it." I took it carefully. The corners were frayed. "I remember that weekend," I said quietly. "You caught a fish. I caught a cold. You tried to convince me it was pneumonia so we wouldn't have to clean the dock." That made both of us smile. "Real this time." Ben looked down, then back up. "I'm not asking for anything. Not forgiveness, not family dinners. I just wanted you to know I see it now. What they did." I held his gaze. "You didn't speak when it mattered," I said, "and I can't forget that. But I can let go of the weight." He nodded. "I don't need you to carry guilt," I added. "Just don't pretend you weren't there." Another pause. "This one is gentler." "I won't," he said. We stood there in the quiet. Not as brothers, not as enemies, just as 2 men who shared a history they didn't write and a silence they no longer needed to fill. When Ben turned to go, I didn't stop him, but I didn't shut the door either. That evening I placed the lake house photo on my desk, not on the wall, not on display, but not hidden, just there. Like a chapter in a book you've finished reading but can't quite forget. Later, Grandpa and I had dinner. He noticed the photo immediately but didn't comment. Instead, he poured 2 glasses of scotch and raised his. To letting go, I clinked my glass with his, and not forgetting. Spring arrived late in Chicago that year. It was subtle, a breeze that no longer bit a sky that dared to stay blue past 6. Grandpa's tulips bloomed early on the front lawn, stubborn against the chill. It was the kind of season that crept in rather than announced itself. Like healing. It had been 4 months since the ruling, 3 since Ben's visit, and just over 1 week since the final deed transfer arrived, notarized and sealed in a plain envelope. Christmas Creek was mine. I hadn't gone back. Until now. I parked in front of the house just after noon. The street was quiet. The same plastic flamingos still decorated the neighbor's yard, their pink faded and cheerfully defiant. I walked up the driveway. The grass had grown unevenly along the edge of the bricks. A small vine snaked across the porch step. Time had settled in without asking permission. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was still, not stale, just silent. I moved slowly through the entryway. The faint scent of lemon cleaner still clung to the corners. A single magazine remained on the side table. On the cover, Susan's favorite celebrity chef smiling widely. The dining room table stood exactly as it had on Christmas Eve, only without the warmth. The same chandelier, the same wallpaper. Only this time I noticed the cracks behind the frames. I walked upstairs, into my old room. Or rather, the guest room I'd always been told was mine, but that never had any trace of me. Until now. I carried it in a box from the car. Inside books. A photo of Mom. My college pennant. And the one thing I had waited months to place. A small brass key. I set it on the nightstand. Not because it opened anything here, but because it symbolized what I had claimed. Not revenge, not even restitution, but return. I spent the afternoon removing the last of Susan's decor. The porcelain angel collection boxed. The framed motivational quote about family values taken down without ceremony. I didn't do it with malice. I did it with precision. And when I was finished, the house looked less curated and more honest. I sat on the front porch as evening fell, sipping the last of Grandpa's favorite bourbon, watching the sky change color. And for the first time, I understood this house had never been about ownership. It had been about erasure, and now about acknowledgement. The next day, I drove to the county clerk's office and filed the paperwork to sell the property. Market value was strong, offers would come quickly, but that wasn't why I smiled. I smiled because I was free to choose. I wasn't staying in a house bought with lies. I wasn't clinging to walls that once excluded me. I wasn't punishing myself by holding on. I was letting go, on my terms. 2 weeks later, on the last day before closing, I returned one final time. I stood in the center of the living room, empty now. Echoes of past dinners, arguments, silences. They drifted around like dust. I didn't chase them. I walked to the fireplace and placed a final object on the mantel. A photo of Mom. Just her. No captions, no frame, just the image of a woman who once believed her son would build something honest. Then I turned to leave, and this time I did close the door behind me. Grandpa met me back in Chicago with 2 coffees and a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked. He smiled. "Something your mom wrote. Found it in an old shoebox after you moved in." I opened it carefully. It wasn't long, just her handwriting looping and uneven. "If they ever forget who you are, remind them with grace. If they ever rewrite your place, write something louder. And when you come home, make sure it's yours. Mom." I folded it slowly, and we sat there 2 generations deep in silence, letting those words fill all the spaces that had once been hollow. Thank you for walking this road with me. If this story spoke to you, leave a comment, share your thoughts. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Because sometimes being seen is the beginning of everything.